It was around 9 p.m. when she walked into the living room. I had the TV on, half watching some show, and she just stood there, clutching her phone like she was debating something important. I felt the tension before she even said a word. "Hey babe," Emily said, too casually, her voice a little too smooth. "I'm going out tonight." I looked at her, my wife of 6 years, standing there in her coat, hair freshly done like she was heading to some high-end event. But she wasn't supposed to have plans tonight. There was no party I knew of. Something twisted in my gut as I tried to keep calm. "Out where?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, though something deep inside me was already screaming. Emily usually went out with her friends on weekends, but tonight was midweek, random, and there hadn't been any heads up. It felt off. She hesitated, looking at me with a strange, unreadable expression. "I'll be staying the night with someone." My heart stopped. What the hell did she just say? "Who?" I managed to ask, my voice quieter than I expected. But Emily was already moving, grabbing her keys from the counter, acting like it was the most normal thing in the world. "Does it matter?" she replied flatly. "Does it matter?" I shot up from the couch, staring at her in disbelief. But she didn't slow down, didn't even look at me directly. It was like she was on autopilot, a version of her I didn't know. My mind scrambled, trying to process what I had just heard, but I couldn't keep up. No explanation. No guilt. No excuses. Just that damn line, "I'll be staying the night with someone." Then, like something out of a cheap soap opera, she walked out. No argument. No fight. Just the quiet click of the door closing behind her, leaving the house feeling too loud in its emptiness. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the door. The eerie calm in how she'd walked out unsettled me. She had decided, without a second thought, without a care in the world, and left me standing there like a fool. My hands were trembling, and I hadn't even figured out whether to be furious or heartbroken yet. It was like the air had been sucked out of the room. And then it hit me, I wasn't just going to sit here. Not this time. She thought she could walk out, and I wouldn't question a damn thing? No way in hell. Adrenaline kicked in, snapping me out of my shock. I grabbed my phone, my keys, and threw on my jacket, heart pounding. This wasn't going to play out without answers. She thought she could walk away that easily? No. I was going to follow her. I had to know who this someone was. I jumped in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. My mind raced. Emily had never been like this, never so brazen, so cold. It was as if I was chasing a ghost of the woman I thought I knew. The streets blurred as I drove through town, trying to guess where she could have gone. I didn't have much to go on, no plan, just pure instinct and the burning need to know. I knew she couldn't have gone far. It was late, and she wasn't dressed for some nightclub. No, this was something more personal. Intimate. The thought of her with someone else made my stomach churn, and I had to fight back the urge to punch the dashboard. I took a deep breath, trying to think clearly. Where would she go? Her phone was my only clue. She was always glued to it lately, messaging someone, hiding it when I walked into the room. I didn't want to admit it then, but the signs had been there for months. I just hadn't put them together. There was one place that came to mind. Her friend Lydia's apartment. Emily had spent a lot of time there recently, more than usual. But something about it didn't sit right. Lydia wasn't the kind of friend who would encourage this. I knew that. So if Emily wasn't really going to Lydia's, where the hell was she going? I pulled into Lydia's apartment complex, parking far enough away that I wouldn't be seen. My heart pounded as I scanned the lot. It was a quiet, dark night, the usual stillness of a weekday evening. But then, there it was, Emily's car, parked near the entrance of the building. My gut clenched. I waited, my pulse racing. If she was really with Lydia, she'd be inside, right? Maybe I was wrong, and this whole thing was just a misunderstanding. Maybe she really was staying with a friend tonight, and this was all in my head. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. 20 minutes passed, and my nerves were on edge, but then I saw it, a shadow moving near her car. A tall figure. Not Emily. A man. He walked out of the building, glancing around as if he didn't want to be seen, before heading straight for her car. My chest tightened. I knew it. There was no maybe about it anymore. She was meeting someone. Him. Before I could stop myself, I got out of the car. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I wasn't thinking, not really. I just started walking toward her car, my footsteps quickening as the rage built inside me. This was it. I was going to confront them both. I wasn't going to be a silent bystander to my own humiliation. The guy opened her car door and leaned inside, fumbling with something, probably her keys. And then she appeared. Emily stepped out of the building, laughing softly as she joined him. The sound of her voice sent a wave of anger crashing over me. I quickened my pace, barely hearing the crunch of gravel beneath my feet. Emily! I called out, my voice sharp, cutting through the quiet. She froze. The guy spun around, surprised. For a second, it was like time stopped. Emily's face paled as she realized what was happening, the smile vanishing from her lips. Her eyes met mine, and in that moment, I saw everything. Guilt. Panic. And something else, relief? Like she had been waiting for this to happen. What the hell is going on? I demanded, my voice louder than I intended, the anger spilling out now. Emily stepped back, her eyes darting between me and the guy, who looked just as shocked as she was. He was tall, mid-30s, wearing a suit like he had just come from some business meeting. He didn't seem like the type to get involved in something messy like this, but there he was, standing beside my wife. The guy raised his hands defensively. Hey, man, I didn't know. Didn't know what? I cut him off, my voice shaking with fury. Didn't know she was married? Emily finally found her voice, though it was shaky and uncertain. It's not what you think. Then what the hell is it? I shouted, taking a step closer. Because from where I'm standing, it sure looks like you're running around behind my back. The guy took a step away from the car, looking uncomfortable. I think I should go, he mumbled, not wanting to be part of the confrontation. He turned and started walking away, leaving Emily standing there, exposed. For a moment, Emily just stared at me, like she didn't know what to say. But then, with a sigh, she dropped her act. The guilt was gone. The fear was gone. Now, it was just her, tired of pretending. I didn't think it would go on like this, she said quietly, almost to herself. I didn't think you'd follow me. Her words hit me like a slap. She wasn't denying it anymore. She wasn't even trying to. And that hurt more than anything. Why, Emily? I asked, my voice trembling with emotion now. Why would you do this to us? To me? She looked at me, her face softening, but there was no apology in her eyes. Just the cold reality of the situation. Because I'm not happy, and I haven't been for a long time. Her words hung in the air, heavy and final. Not happy for a long time. That was it, then. No big explanation. No tearful apology. Just the brutal truth, delivered without a hint of remorse. My mind raced, trying to process it. We had problems, every couple does, but I never thought it had come to this. How had I missed it? I stood there, stunned, feeling like the ground beneath me had given way. What do you mean you haven't been happy? I finally asked, my voice quieter now, the anger giving way to something else, pain. Why didn't you ever say anything? Emily sighed, running a hand through her hair, as if this conversation was exhausting her. I don't know, Ryan, she said, her voice flat. I guess I just let it build up. And after a while, it felt too late to fix things. I stared at her, my chest tightening. Too late? How could it be too late? We could have worked on this. You could have told me. She shook her head, her eyes dropping to the ground. It's not that simple. Not that simple? I repeated, disbelief creeping back into my voice. You didn't even try, Emily. You didn't give us a chance. Instead, you just, decided to cheat. You thought that was easier? Her eyes flicked up to meet mine, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of guilt. But it wasn't enough. I didn't plan for this to happen, she said softly. It just did. It just did? I shook my head, feeling a surge of anger mixed with the hurt. You don't accidentally end up in someone else's bed, Emily. She didn't respond right away, and that silence told me everything I needed to know. I had been right. This wasn't some emotional connection or a temporary fling. It had gone much further than that, and now she wasn't even trying to hide it. I'm sorry, she finally whispered, but the words felt hollow, empty. Sorry? I echoed, my voice barely above a whisper now. Sorry doesn't fix this. Sorry doesn't erase what you've done. Emily glanced away, as if she couldn't bear to look at me anymore. Maybe she couldn't face what she had destroyed. Maybe she just didn't care enough to try. Either way, I was done trying to understand. The woman standing in front of me wasn't the person I thought I had married. That much was clear. So, what now? I asked, my voice hardening. You're just going to keep seeing him? Keep lying to me? Emily didn't answer right away. She just stood there, shifting awkwardly as if waiting for me to calm down, to let it go. But there was no letting this go. Not anymore. I don't know, she finally said, and that was what broke me. Not the cheating, not the lies, but the fact that she didn't even have a plan. She wasn't fighting for us. She wasn't fighting for anything. She was just indifferent. I felt my stomach churn, the reality of it all settling in. She had already checked out of this marriage long before tonight. I had just been too blind to see it. Unbelievable, I muttered, turning away from her, running a hand over my face. The rage I had felt earlier had turned into something darker, something colder. I didn't even know how to look at her anymore. I walked back to my car, my head spinning, my heart pounding in my chest. Emily stayed where she was, watching me leave but making no move to stop me. There were no tearful apologies, no desperate attempts to salvage what was left of our marriage. She just stood there, letting me go as easily as she had let our relationship slip through her fingers. I got into the car and slammed the door, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I stared straight ahead, trying to get my emotions under control. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't push away the crushing weight of what had just happened. This was it. The end of everything. I sat there for a few minutes, breathing heavily, my mind a whirlwind of anger, sadness, and disbelief. Then, without thinking, I started the car and drove off into the night, leaving her, and everything I thought we had, behind. I drove aimlessly for hours, the dark roads blurring together as I tried to clear my head. The rage inside me hadn't gone away, but it had dulled into something heavier, something that sat in my chest like a stone. It was strange. One minute I was furious, the next I just felt numb, like I was floating outside my own body, watching my life unravel from a distance. Eventually, I found myself pulling into a quiet parking lot by the beach. It was late, and the place was deserted. I turned off the engine and just sat there, staring out at the water, the waves crashing softly against the shore. I didn't even know how long I stayed like that, maybe minutes, maybe hours. Time didn't seem to matter anymore. What was I supposed to do now? My marriage was over. Or, at least, it felt like it was. Emily's words echoed in my mind over and over again. I'm not happy. I haven't been for a long time. How had I missed it? How had I let it get this bad without seeing the signs? Part of me wanted to go back, to confront her again, to force her to give me answers that made sense. But another part of me knew it wouldn't matter. She had already made her choice. She didn't care enough to fight for us, and maybe that was the most painful part of it all. I grabbed my phone from the passenger seat, my hand shaking slightly as I scrolled through my contacts. I needed to talk to someone, anyone who could help me make sense of this mess. My thumb hovered over a name, David, my best friend since college. He'd know what to say. He always did. But as I stared at his name on the screen, something stopped me. What was I supposed to tell him? That my wife of 6 years had just walked out on me to be with another man? That I had followed her like some pathetic fool, only to be confronted with the cold reality that our marriage had been dead for months? I couldn't do it. I couldn't face the pity in his voice, the questions, the advice. Not yet. I tossed my phone onto the dashboard, running my hands through my hair as I let out a long, frustrated sigh. I had no idea what to do next. As I sat there, staring out at the water, my thoughts drifted back to the beginning, back when Emily and I had first met. I had fallen for her so quickly, caught up in her laughter, her energy, the way she lit up a room just by being in it. I'd thought we were perfect together. We had fun, we talked for hours about everything and nothing. It had all seemed so easy back then. But somewhere along the way, things had changed. We had changed. And now, here I was, sitting alone in a parking lot at 2 a.m., my marriage in ruins. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that Emily wasn't the only one who had let things fall apart. I had, too. I'd gotten comfortable. Maybe I'd taken her for granted, assumed she'd always be there no matter what. I hadn't noticed the distance growing between us, hadn't realized how far apart we had drifted until it was too late. But that didn't excuse what she had done. Cheating wasn't the answer. It never was. If she had been unhappy, she should have told me. We could have worked on it. We could have tried to fix things. But she hadn't given us that chance. She'd chosen someone else, and now there was no going back. A sharp knock on the window startled me out of my thoughts. I turned to see a police officer standing outside my car, shining his flashlight in my face. "Everything okay in there?" the officer asked, his voice muffled through the glass. I rolled down the window, feeling the cool night air hit my face. "Yeah, sorry. I'm just thinking." The officer nodded, his expression softening. "It's late. You've been sitting here a while. Just wanted to make sure you're all right." "I'm fine," I lied, forcing a weak smile. "Just needed some space." He steadied me for a moment, then gave a small nod. "All right. Well, take care of yourself." As he walked back to his patrol car, I realized how ridiculous I must have looked, sitting alone in the middle of the night, wallowing in my misery. But the truth was, I didn't know where else to go. Home didn't feel like an option. Not yet. After the officer drove off, I started the car and pulled out of the parking lot, my mind still racing. I couldn't avoid Emily forever. At some point, I'd have to go back. We'd have to talk. Maybe we'd even have to figure out what came next, whether that was divorce or something else, I wasn't sure. But whatever it wasn't going to be easy. The drive home felt longer than usual, my hands gripping the wheel tighter with every mile. When I finally pulled into the driveway, the house stood there in the darkness, quiet and still. I sat in the car for a few moments, staring at the front door, wondering if Emily was still awake. Wondering if she even cared that I had left. With a heavy sigh, I got out of the car and walked inside. The house was silent, empty. She wasn't waiting for me. I wasn't surprised. I headed to the guest room, grabbing a pillow and blanket from the closet. I didn't want to sleep in our bed. Not tonight. Maybe not ever again. As I lay there in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, I felt the full weight of what had happened hit me. My marriage was over. Whether we said the words out loud or not, it was done. And for the first time, I allowed myself to really feel it, the grief, the anger, the loss. It wasn't going to be easy, but one thing was clear, this was the beginning of the end. The next morning came too quickly. I woke up in the guest room, the thin rays of sunlight streaming through the blinds. My body felt heavy, drained of all energy, like I hadn't slept at all. For a brief moment, I forgot where I was. But then, reality came crashing back, bringing with it the memory of the night before. Emily was already up. I could hear her moving around in the kitchen. The familiar sounds of coffee brewing, drawers opening and closing, normal morning routines that now felt like a cruel mockery of what our life used to be. I lay there for a moment, listening to the mundane clatter, trying to muster the strength to face her. Eventually, I got up. I couldn't hide in that room forever. I had to deal with this, even though I had no idea where to start. The truth was, part of me still wanted answers, some kind of explanation for how we had ended up here. But another part of me knew that whatever she had to say wouldn't be enough. I stepped into the kitchen, and there she was, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee in her hands. She didn't look surprised to see me, just tired, like she'd been expecting this conversation. "Morning," she said quietly, barely glancing up at me. I didn't respond right away. I grabbed a cup from the cupboard, poured myself some coffee, and sat down across from her. The silence between us was thick, almost suffocating. Neither of us seemed to know what to say. So, I finally began, breaking the tension. "What now?" Emily looked up at me, her face unreadable. She set her coffee cup down and sighed. "I don't know, Ryan. I don't know what to tell you." Her words were as hollow as I expected. No explanation, no plan, just more of the same indifference. I stared at her, trying to figure out how the woman I had once loved more than anything could sit there and act like none of this mattered. "You don't know what to tell me?" I repeated, my voice calm, though I could feel the frustration bubbling just beneath the surface. "How about you start by explaining why you threw away everything we had?" She shook her head, her eyes dropping to the table. "It's not that simple." "It is that simple," I snapped, my voice rising slightly. "You chose to cheat, Emily. You chose to lie to me. I didn't even get a say in any of this." She flinched slightly at my words, but there was still no apology. No remorse. She just sat there, her hands folded on the table, looking like she wanted to be anywhere else but here. "I didn't want it to turn out like this," she said softly. "I didn't plan for it to happen." I let out a bitter laugh. "Well, it did. And now we're here. So what do we do? Pretend everything's fine? Keep living like strangers in the same house? Because I can't do that." Emily's eyes finally met mine, and for the first time in a long time, I saw a flicker of emotion. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was regret. But it wasn't enough to undo what had been done. "I don't know if we can fix this," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. I nodded slowly, the truth of her words settling over me. "I don't think we can either." We sat there in silence again, the weight of our broken marriage pressing down on both of us. I had spent the last few hours trying to figure out how we could move forward, but now, sitting across from her, I realized there was no moving forward. Not together, anyway. Too much had been said. Too much had been done. "I think it's time we call it," I said quietly, my heart heavy but certain. "I think it's time we end this." Emily didn't argue. She didn't cry. She just nodded, her face pale and drawn. "Maybe you're right." It was strange. After all the fighting, the accusations, and the sleepless nights, the moment we decided to end it felt so quiet. There were no dramatic scenes, no shouting matches, no begging for forgiveness. Just a mutual acknowledgement that we were done. "What do we tell people?" she asked after a long pause, her voice barely a whisper. "The truth," I replied. "That we couldn't make it work anymore." She nodded, looking down at her hands. I knew what she was really asking. What would we tell our families? Our friends? What would we tell ourselves? But none of that mattered now. The only thing that mattered was that we both knew it was over. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork, uncomfortable conversations, and quiet goodbyes. Emily moved out of the house shortly after we made our decision, packing up her things in a few boxes and leaving without much fanfare. We didn't argue about who got what. By the time she left, the house felt emptier than ever, like it was haunted by the ghosts of what we used to be. I spent a lot of time alone, trying to figure out what came next. The silence in the house was overwhelming at first, but eventually, I got used to it. I started focusing on myself, on the things I had let slide while I was too wrapped up in trying to save my marriage. I reconnected with old friends, threw myself into work, and started going to the gym again. The grief was still there, of course. Losing someone you loved, someone you built a life with, doesn't go away overnight. But slowly, the pain became more manageable. The sharp edges dulled, and I started to feel like myself again. One evening, months after Emily had left, I found myself sitting on the back porch, watching the sun set over the horizon. The house was quiet, but this time, it didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't looking back. I wasn't dwelling on what could have been or what had gone wrong. I was looking forward, thinking about what came next. I wasn't sure what the future held for me, but one thing was certain: I was free. And for the first time, that was enough.